Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to carry on making a wide body fender for my Mitsubishi Starion. So at this point, we're at video, I think, number 9, and the 6th video in doing the wide body modeling of the car. So this is a part where I have some sort of bad news. This process takes a while. It just takes a good bit of time, and it's going to be time consuming no matter what you do, because if you're making a design, you will ultimately get to a point where you're not happy with it. You want to make changes, you want to keep going, making adjustments. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to reuse what we've done so we don't have to start over from scratch, and how we can quickly iterate through some designs. Because ultimately, what we've learned so far is we've learned how to use the original scan to replicate the geometry underneath. So with this, what we did was we took that scan data and we sort of worked out how to get those body lines and how to get the rough shape in a box display. We made a copy of that just in case we needed it again, and then we built out this version of a fender flare. Now, for me, this doesn't fit the vision that I have for this car. But again, if you don't have the artistic skills to draw everything down by hand and you have to go through the 3D modeling process and sort of explore these designs, you're likely going to get to this point too. So what I want to do in this video is I want to take a look at some sort of rapid concept generation based on what we've done so far. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the fine details. We're not going to spend a lot of time on things that we've already covered in the previous videos. Now, for me to make a design, and full confession, after the last video, I actually recorded another video and did a completely different design. And I did that a third time as well. And I just wasn't happy with the way that the series is going. So what I want to do is I want to give you as many tools as possible so that you can understand how to use these tools to your advantage when you're designing your parts. So this video might be a little bit longer than the 30 minutes. I'm not really sure because obviously I go into these and we follow them at the same time. So we're going to just see where it takes us. So the first thing that I want to mention is that with forms, we're direct modeling. And this is actually a really big benefit to us because we can take our design and simply do a Control C and a Control V, copy and paste. Obviously, if you're on a Mac machine, that's going to be your Command V, Command C. But in Windows and Fusion 360, we just copy and paste it. We have an exact copy. All the faces, all the edges are in the same place. So the reason that this is nice is because it allows us to take what we've done, what we spent time on, and we can go back to a sort of basic level to re-visualize what we want this thing to look like. So for example, I'm going to double click this edge, hit delete. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to get rid of some of these defining lines that we built. I'm going to get rid of the double edge up here. I'm going to get rid of this midline ridge. And I probably want to get rid of this one as well. I don't really like the way that the shape was working. So I want to make some adjustments. And basically what we do is we just work ourselves backwards. Once we get to a point where we're back to the basic shape, then we can start building out what we want this thing to look like. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a look at this from the top, and I'm going to begin making some adjustments. So I'm going to take this edge. I'm going to reset my pivot point to the front because I know the front is roughly where it needs to be. And I am going to rotate this thing out. 5 degrees is probably a bit much, maybe -2 degrees, and then left click in the canvas area. So essentially all I did was I took that edge where it was, and I just rotated it out. Now I'm going to make some minor manual adjustments, just moving things around. And then I actually want to bring back the copy of our OE fender, and I'm going to hide this mesh here. So this copy of the OE fender, we're going to put in box display. The reason that I want to do this is because I want to use another tool that we have at our disposal, and that's instead of copying the entire body, we're going to copy individual faces. So I'm going to select these faces on the top. And as I get around to the front, I'm going to begin making selections around the front. Now, the goal of this is to take all the stuff that we created already, the time we spent already building out this fender. And I'm only going to go to there because the flare is going to be a bit odd. But copy all that, Control C, Control V. So once again, what we did was we took our OE fender and we just copied the faces we're interested in. Now the reason that we did this is because now we can go back and we can weld vertices. I can take the vertex from the wide body and I can just start to attach it to the rest of this fender. Now remember, when you're doing this, that you're selecting the vertex that you want to move and then the position you want it to go to. Now we're going to start to run into a problem because we've got some extra edges here, and I'm going to talk about how to deal with that. But I'm going to go ahead and just put them as close as I can to whatever edge I have available. I'm going to go push those two, and these two are relatively close, put them together. And you'll notice that these edges look different, and that's because we aren't able to weld that, that vertex to that edge because of the T-point. But we're going to go ahead and, again, just connect all these extra pieces together. And this is another reason why we deleted some of those extra edges that we had, because they weren't going to help us in this case trying to connect everything together. So put this together, and we'll put this together here. And now it looks pretty good. We have to fix or address this. And the way that we're going to do this is we can add a T-point by using insert point and just click on the edge instead of drawing the line. And even though we can't see it, it actually divided up this edge for us. So when we go to modify and weld vertices, I can now take and attach that there and heal up that edge. We'll do the same thing over here as well. So once again, modify, insert point, and you want to be careful that you're putting it on the correct edge. We'll say OK, and then we'll weld those vertices. So this meant that we could keep all of the detail that we deemed to be necessary, that we preserved, and then we built it and connected it to the rest of the fender. Now, of course, if we look at this in smooth display, it's not going to look like much because we don't have any controlling or defining edges. But when we look at it in box display, what we're looking for is we want to be happy with the shape. So if we want to make any adjustments, now's the time to do so. So for example, up here, it's not quite where I want it to be. So I'm going to start making some manual adjustments. And anybody that's watched any of the content on this channel before, you might be thinking to yourself, why don't you just pull it to the mesh? Well, we do have that tool where we can pull this to the mesh. However, I'm not quite to that point yet. I really want to focus on getting the geometry roughly how I like it. Now these T-points are causing me problems, so at this stage in the design, I'm going to get rid of them and I'm going to move or associate those T-points further down on this edge. It's going to be the easiest thing because anytime we have this happening here, we want this to be a straight line, otherwise it's going to end up being a star point, and that's not what we want anywhere we want to control that edge. So we'll clean that up a little bit. Once again, we can get rid of extra edges if we don't feel we need them. So this here is going to be problematic. It's going to mess up the arch, but I'm going to leave that small edge there for right now. This one here, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of as well. And the main reason I'm doing that is because when I go to insert edge or bevel something, I want to make sure that the continuity is carried. So at this point, now things are looking pretty good. Now we've built out the entire fender. And we've got sort of this front section that's working, but we need to start fixing the curvature. So I know I said that we don't want to put a lot of emphasis on the fine details at this point. However, there is an area that is going to cause us problems, and that's this corner right here. We have to be able to match this corner to maintain the design intent. We need to be able to sort of fit with that. So the way that we're going to do that is actually a little trick. We're going to take that edge, and I'm going to hide the mesh for right now. We're going to take that edge and we're going to use the bevel tool. Now the bevel tool is going to take the selected edge, and I know I've talked about this before, but I'm going to explain it again. It's going to take the selected edge, and then whatever value we put here for this bevel location, in this case it's going to go 11% of the way to the next edge, and then on the other side 11% of the way to that edge as well. And they're relatively close, so it looks pretty symmetric. And then it'll get rid of the one in the middle, assuming we're only adding one segment. And the reason that this is important is because it's automatically going to break up this face here. Now, in general, we don't want these n-gons, but in this case, in order to match that shape, we're going to have to do something in this corner. And the way that we're going to do this is by moving these edges around. And I don't like to do this in smooth display, but for right now, to get these edges in the right location, I am going to break my own rule and make some adjustments here. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to go back after the fact and fix it in box display. So I'm going to get it relatively close in smooth display. I'm going to go ahead and manipulate this. And once I'm happy with the way that it looks, I'm going to go back into box display and I'm going to start to make some changes. So I'm going to go to insert point and I'm going to come down to here and then get rid of that edge. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to make this edge normal to the direction of curvature. So for example, it's curving right here. I want it to be essentially the same angle between this edge and this edge. This one, same thing. We're going to go to insert point and I'm going to come back this way just a little bit. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to have the angle between this line and this one be the same as the angle between this line and this one, or relatively close, I should say. So this gives me a reasonably tight corner on the front that I'm looking for. There are problems here that you can see that we will have to address, but for right now, that gives me a pretty good starting point. Now, the reason that we need to address this is because we've got a T-point in the middle of this face, and we can use our tools, utilities, repair body, and we can fix some of the stuff that's going on here. You'll notice that there's an error star here, which is going to be affecting things, and that's because of this big n-gon as well. Now, this is the hardest part, or at least for me, I think, of modeling cars in forms, because you have to change direction, which means you're going to end up with a star point or a triangle somewhere, and fixing these is going to have an influence on the overall design. Right? We really want these edges to flow in the direction that we think the curvature needs to go. But you can see it's pulling this edge down and it's causing a droop. And that's obviously not what 1980s cars look like. We want those harder edges. So once we get to this point, we can start adding those harder edges by inserting additional edges. And once again, we're not going to really focus our attention on getting the curvature right just yet, but I just want to highlight this because we want to make sure, even if we don't keep it, we want to make sure that we are able to drive those edges with a little bit of a harder feel. So once again, adding those edges in, we are highlighting what the original car may have looked like. So if we look at the mesh and we hide this and we bring back our edges, you can see that we've got those two very defining lines on the car. Then we've got these defining lines here and then down here as well. So at this stage for me, again, it's really important that I don't get too hung up on the details, but I am still able to control that with additional edges. Now, once we know that we can do that, I'm going to go ahead and delete those additional edges because they're only going to complicate things for our design right now. But again, it's just a matter of knowing that we can do it, and then we can go back and just remove them. Remember, we're direct modeling here. Now, one thing I would suggest is if you get to this stage, if you start to make your design or redo a design and you get to a stage where you're happy with the overall layout, the overall flow of everything, once again, just make another copy. Make sure that you name it something that makes sense, but make a copy of it. For me, I'm not quite there yet. I want to fix a few things. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to come down to here. Get rid of that. I'm going to repeat the process over here. I don't like it when these edges jog over like that, so I'm going to try to get a little bit better edge flow out of it. And then we also need to think about the defining lines of the car, how we're going to incorporate that into the rest of the flare. Now for me, again, we've got this n-gon here and this n-gon here, which these have been converted to star points now, but we can start to define the shape, the overall shape that we're looking for. Now, this is where things like having the fender flare stop at the midline of the body can be an interesting effect. I know I've seen a lot of cars do that. It means that you end up having to cut away a good bit of the fender to make that work or look good. And what we're going to do is we're just going to explore that. So once we get a little bit further on in retopologizing this, I'm going to go ahead and explore that. I think what I'd like to do is, for now, I want to connect this to here. making this a quad. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, connect this to here, making that a quad, and then delete to get rid of this edge, to get rid of that. We don't want those triangles there. Now these T-points are potentially problematic, so I'm going to get rid of that one. And you know what, for right now, let's get rid of that one too. We can fix some of this stuff later. If we take a look really quick in smooth display, the wheel arch doesn't look too bad. This is a star point over here. I would really love it to be a T point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it, convert it back to a T point, and say OK. Now that that's a T point, we've got the general layout of the fender, and we can start sort of building out the shape. So I'm going to call this full fender 1. I'm going to copy and paste it. Once again, the intent here is to not waste any of our work. So we're just going to call this one full fender 2. So that way we can always go back to, I'm going to rename this one smooth fender and OE fender copy. But once again, there's no harm in having copies of these form bodies. I will say that when we go to finish form, it's going to convert all of them to surfaces or solids depending on the geometry that you have. So do be careful that you don't get carried away. If you get to a point where you're happy with some of the designs, you can get rid of some of those older ones. But what I think I'd like to do is I'd like to explore the original body line, but just instead of it staying narrow right here, I want to take this little sort of detail and start to make it wider there. And then when it gets to the door, I'm just going to have an opening between the original fender and the over fender. So that way it's, it's sort of got that flare out. So I think that's what I want to try to explore with this version of it. So this means that back in the front display, and keep in mind that I am using perspective with ortho. So anytime I actually go to a front view, we're looking at this from an orthographic perspective. It sounds kind of weird to say orthographic perspective, but we're not looking at a true perspective image. We're looking at the orthographic version of that view. So I want to just sort of smooth out this transition a little bit, make some minute adjustments. And again, we haven't gone to the level where we are adding a ton of detail. We are really focusing our attention on what the box display looks like. And once you get to that point with forms modeling and you start to really work with and manipulate things at the box level, it'll go a really long way to understanding how to build out a smooth version of your design. So I want to pull some of this around. This is all going to get cut away in the surface, but I want to at least get it a little bit closer to what the bumper looks like. And remember, the box display location and the smooth display location are going to be different. They're not ever going to be exactly the same, but again, we're working on the box display and just making sure that we are at least where the bumper is. This portion here is going to be important because that is what is going to get cut away. So we're going to cut away from here and down like the original. So we want to make sure that we're close to the body here, and that's essentially what we're looking for. Okay, so now we're pretty good here. Let's go ahead and think about how we can make this wider. Now we already did some initial widening here, but you can see that this sort of flares back. So I want to just begin adjusting the shape. I'm going to take that out, probably take this out a bit wider, and then slowly manipulate everything. Now, we can do this with the entire edge selection like we did originally and rotate it, but this is also a good opportunity to practice with manual manipulations. And what we're always looking to do is we're looking to keep these edges parallel or slightly converging or slightly diverging. We want them to not have a drastic change for what we're doing at this stage in the design. We want it to look relatively smooth without having to go into smooth display. And this is going to give us a good idea of the shape. And we can come back to this view and maybe pull this out just a little bit and then take a look at it from the side. So basically we're creating a wider version of that narrow body fender. So that looks pretty good. I mean, obviously we could spend probably more time just finessing it, but overall I think that looks pretty good. Now before I get too much further, I am going to go back and use the insert edge because I want to drive those curves in the smooth display and see what that looks like, because this is the defining edge of the design. So we're going to stick that pretty close. Right click and repeat, and we'll do that one more time. This time it's going to be pretty close to this edge. And then we'll go into our smooth display, Control and 4 to hide our edges, and take a look at this from a couple different views. So it's a little smooth right there. Could do a little bit more work, but it does have that defining edge that I'm looking for. So it carries over the top of the fender, and it does give me that smooth look. Now this is also a good opportunity to think about if you want to change the overall shape of whatever you're modeling. If you're have a boxy 80s car like this, but you want to smooth out the lines, then this is something that you can start doing. With this now, what I notice is that upper edge looks pretty good, but this section here doesn't look right. It just kind of stays sucked into the car. And that means that we're not going to be able to stick it right next to that fender. We're going to have to flare it out and then probably do some surfacing work to make it look right. But that's okay. I mean, it's what we're here to try to do and play with. So we're going to move that out manually, move this out manually, double clicking the mouse to get it back in view, and then maybe take a look at this from the front. It's hard to tell where these are from the front, but once again, we can look at the other edges and kind of pick up on those lines. And once again, the front edge is really the critical one where we want to make sure we stay close to the car. Any of this stuff can be modified, and we can create some manual patches with surfaces later, but we want to get the overall shape to look like we want. All right, so I'm going to take a look at that in smooth display one more time, Control and 4 to hide my edges. There's still kind of a wrinkle in that corner that we need to deal with. And it's because of that end-gon in the corner. We will have to do a little bit of work there. But I think overall that shape looks pretty good. And that's probably a good point to start retopologizing that corner, as well as working on those detail edges that we want to carry into the design. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this. This is another thing that I like to do every once in a while is I like to just pause, take a step back, look at it, and see if there's something that I'm missing, something I'm potentially missing about the shape. So this is a good time for you to do the same thing. Pause, just think about the shape, think about where you want it to go. So one thing that is important to note is this body line here for the narrow cars, so this one here, that body line is not there on the wide versions of the car. So essentially what we have is this section here where we've got attached to the lower bumper. This sort of just goes up and is really smooth all the way to this point where the wide body starts. It's kind of smooth all up in here, whereas the narrow bodies dip in and then have this, sort of defining line. And that defining line picks back up on the wide body cars just before the door, and it carries on through the door, and then it disappears on the rear wide body as well. So I really want to try to retain that as sort of a style feature. It'll be very distinct difference from what a traditional wide body Starion looks like. I mean, this is obviously going to be different anyways, but that is something that I would like to play around with. So I'm going to do a little bit of work here. And I think what I'll do is, let's see here. What I'll probably do is figure out a way to take this from being an end-gon. And I think in order to do that, what I want to do is insert an edge. I'm going to do this as a reference. And let's do this from the side. So I'm going to insert an edge, probably right about there. And then I'm going to connect it. Actually, we're going to connect it to that endpoint. Because I got those extra lines in there, you want to make sure that you do zoom in a little bit. So insert point, grab that end, and connect it there. We can potentially leave this as a T-point here. We will have to make some slight adjustment. Remember, when you have a T-point intersecting an edge, you do not want to move that point. So I'm going to just move this vertex here. Actually, you know what? Let's take this. Yeah, let's move this out. Because we're recreating that line, we have the ability to move it out a bit, and that'll smooth it out for us. And we'll take this one here as well. Always remember that when you're using insert point or insert edge with simple insertion mode, it's going to just be flat in that area. So you do want to spend a little time to sort of figure that out. Now, I think that extra piece there has fixed that wrinkle in the corner. So that looks pretty good. It's still very bubbly here. There's no defining lines. So now's the time for me to start adding those defining lines. So we're going to go to the side. And remember that this is all getting cut away up until at least the top of the marker light here. So we're going to have to do some surfacing work to connect to that. But this stuff right here is all getting cut away. So having T-points or maybe introducing some bad geometry there isn't the end of the world. It's something that we want to be careful of for sure, but it's not necessarily the end of the world. So I'm not going to be carrying the edges all the way around the front. I'm going to start here and just select a few edges because I want it to disappear before it hits the flare. And then I'm going to use insert edge. And I'm going to stick an edge relatively close. When I say close, it generally means 0.05 to 0.1. And then with that new edge, remember, we want to be careful not to move the T-point, but we can move this vertex and this vertex. We're going to take a look at this from the front. And just pull it in a little bit. Now, pulling it in a little bit is going to allow us to introduce an edge there. Now, what we're going to find probably pretty quickly is that once it crosses the bumper, it's not going to look great. But again, we're cutting all that away, so I don't really care what happens there. But I want to make sure that I do drive that shape a bit more. So I think it's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and go back to a right-hand view and just take a look at what we have again. So let's hide the mesh body. Oh, actually, let's hide the form body. So on the mesh body, let's see, we can highlight that edge. We can see where it hits. So we need another edge up here to sort of drive that shape home. So from my box display, I need to add a couple edges here. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and use insert edge. I'm going to put it at about the same, 0.04, 0.05. Come here. And this time what I want to do is I'm going to take these vertices and I'm going to pull them in a little bit. Take a look at that. Now, it's not going to become apparent with these creases. They're going to be very subtle. So you can see it's very subtle there. But they're kind of not going in the same direction. Like we're not getting a sense that those are going sort of along the same line. And part of the reason is because those creases have to disappear. And we've got this T-point here, we've got a star point, and all of these things are affecting our curvature. So what ends up happening is you need to create some additional edges to help drive the shape how you want it in order to keep it from doing this. And this means that I'm going to double click this edge. I'm going to go to insert edge and I am going to put an edge out close to this. See if I can drive that shape a little bit more. So Control and 4, you can see now we've got sort of that flat lip there. And we're going to drive those shapes a little bit more. Getting there, but it is going to take a little bit of work. Now, in some cases, it can be helpful for us to use make uniform and just allow it to sort of adjust things to get them a little bit smoother. In other cases, what you might find is you actually need to insert another edge. Now, this gets a little bit tricky because essentially what we end up doing is we end up adding a lot of T-points, and we are controlling geometry in a very tight area. But what ends up happening when we do this is, because we are controlling that geometry in such a tight area, it's forcing it to be horizontal. So if we take a look at this, Control and 4, what it's going to be doing in that area, it's going to be driving it a bit more horizontal. Now, I still don't like what's happening over here. So what this tells me is that I likely want to carry these edges a bit further. I'm going to try to do Insert Point, and I'm going to try to take it all the way up to this edge here. And then take a look in Smooth Display, Control 4 to hide my edges. And it's starting to work, but it's not really as apparent as I want. So this, again, this kind of tells me that I need to get a bit more drastic with where I'm moving these edges. So we're going to use Edit Form. And because this T-point here, I have to be careful with that edge, but I can move this vertex out, or I should be able to. Let's find out how badly it messes things up. I'm going to pull that out. Actually, no, it does not like moving that one, so I am going to just pull these out. Let's see if I can drive that shape a little bit better. So Control 4, obviously you can see that there's a bit of a pattern here, just keeps going back. So it's not really working out how I like, and this does tend to happen. I mean, you're not always going to be able to just drive the shape because every shape will be a little bit different. So for me, I am going to take it back and just pull it back to square one, back to where I was happy with the box display, and continue to work on that. So what this is telling me is that I don't have enough in the way of driving the shape. So what I want to do is I want to insert another edge, but what I'm going to do is take it from here to, let's say, here. And we're going to put an edge just kind of in the middle of the fender. Now this edge here is going to help us drive the shape a little bit more. If we want to flare it out, this is a good time for us to do it. Maybe grab a couple of these, modify, and just make sure it's not completely flat in there. And this extra edge here is going to give us a little bit more control over the shape. Once again, we are going to go back and tighten up these corners and do a bit more. But right now, all that's going to do is complicate the process. But adding these extra edges gives us a bit more control. It evens out the overall sort of distance between all these faces. And now, driving that curvature a bit more globally means that we can take this and maybe, if we're lucky, pull this down closer to the fender and help drive that edge a bit more flat. So it's got some interesting geometry because it's flat, and we will have to fix that. So we're going to take, let's just take a couple edges. We'll take these and we'll push them in. Again, it doesn't like it when it's flat. It doesn't want those two edges to be right next to each other to be completely flat. Alt and 3, Control and 4. Now you can see we're starting to drive the shape a little bit better. Those lines are looking a little bit more horizontal. It's hard to see with the colors in here, but we can turn on our zebra stripes, and the zebra stripes will show that we've got this line that's going up and over the fender. This is going to give us the ability to tap into driving that edge, hopefully a bit more straight. This is an area where working in surfaces is definitely going to be a bit easier or better than working in the forms. The forms are very hard for us to drive these straight edges on these designs, especially once we introduce the opening. If we didn't have the wheel opening there and we were just doing it with the underlying fender without that wheel opening, this would be a much easier process for us. And that's actually another way that we can approach the design, is by tackling this as if it was two separate form bodies. So we've got the one for the overall shape of the fender, and then we've got the one that is solely looking at the wheel arch. Now, if we want to go down that path, once again, what I suggest is making a copy and hiding this one. I'm going to put this one back in box display. And what we can do is we can, let's see, fender no arch. We can simply come in and just get rid of the arch. So I'm going to take this and delete it. I think we might have a double edge in there. Let's see if I can zoom in far enough to get it. Let's see. Get rid of that. And then we have our OE fender copy, which has the original sort of fender shape. So what we want to do is we want to fill in all of this inside area, and I'll get rid of this little lip here as well. But we want to fill in all of this inside area as if the wheel opening wasn't there, and then we'll build out the wheel opening on its own. So the way that I'm going to do that is first I'm going to select these vertices, and then I'm going to use my pivot point set right here, and I'm going to scale them horizontally, which will allow me to bring those in line. I'll do the same thing over here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm looking at the fender shape underneath that we built, and this is approximately where those edges are. And I made a bad selection there, so let's go back and grab these, set pivot, put it back up there. Then we'll grab this, and oh, looks like I got one from underneath. Let's do Control Z. All right, I will do this one more time. Oh, the problem is there's a T-point here. That T-point is causing a problem. I'll select it for now, but we need to get rid of it. Let's reset the pivot to this position, and then we'll just scale these horizontally. Okay, so that T-point was what was causing me the problem. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. The way that we do that, or one of the ways, is to just simply merge it with one of the sections next to it. Now that we have this, let's repeat that process. There's a T-point there. We can bridge these. So we're going to go to Modify, Bridge. The first side is going to be these four. The second side will be these four. Because I don't have that fifth one yet, I didn't carry it on over here. And then the number of faces is going to be 2, which should give us the right amount here. We're going to say OK. And then we can use Modify Weld Vertices and bring this one down to here. Now, it takes a little bit of time, but we could continue on sort of retopologizing and cleaning this up, and that's the best thing that we can do. Because we've done that so much before, I'm not going to show that process. I mean, we can show it, but I'm going to speed it up because there's no reason that we need to go back through that again. All right, now that we have sort of the fender shape here, basically all I did was, work on what I like to call retopologizing. So just kind of moving things around where I think they need to be. Now we can really work on refining the shape. It's kind of moving things around in the box display. And again, we're looking to match the shape underneath. I want to keep those style lines. So like this edge here, I want to try to keep that style line. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this without the wheel opening, which is going to be much easier. And we can pull this out. And this, again, just like everything else, this is going to take a little bit of time. The more time and effort you put into it at this stage, likely the easier it'll be. This T-point is going to cause me some problems because that's where I want an edge. So I'm going to just simply select that edge and delete it. And that should straighten this, this extra line up for me. Yeah, it looks okay. All right, so now we want to drive, this is a straight line, this is a straight line, and this is a straight line. Now from the side, before I get into adding additional edges, I want to make sure that I go in and I'm going to select all these vertices. This thing is always in my way. I'm going to select all of these vertices. We're going to reset the pivot point. I'm going to do it at the front. And I'm going to scale them vertically to 0. Now they're not going to move much because they're already pretty close, but we're going to do the same thing over here. Again, move that out of the way. Once you move it, it doesn't seem to get back in your way, but you have to move it every time. All right, and we'll scale these vertically again to 0. And just for good measure, I'll do the same thing here. Back one looks like it goes up just a little bit. We'll do it from the front point again and scale that to 0. So now I know that those are straight. I can work on adjusting the rest of the shape a little bit, leaving those edges alone. And then I can come in and do insert edge or bevel. Now, bevel is a good option. However, we have to think about what happens to these edges when they intersect something else. So for example, if I create a bevel up here, what's going to happen to all these additional edges? So we can go ahead and try it. Double click that edge. Going to go to modify bevel. I'm going to put 0.5 as my segment distance. Do the same thing here. Repeat bevel. It remembers the setting. And we'll do one more here. Because of that T-point, bevel actually might be a little tricky. We'll see what it does there. All right, so it carried the T-point over to the other one, so that's pretty good. Now, bevel is a little bit better than inserting edge because with the number of segments set to 1, it'll move both edges and we won't have that same problem. So let's take a look at this in smooth display, Control 4. Now, those edges are much more straight than they were with the wheel arch in the way. And again, this is sort of something that is very tricky to do with forms in general. So with forms, having those straight edges is possible, but as soon as we introduce additional, in this case, additional curvature where we have a star point or an n-gon, then we're going to start to see problems. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because I don't like what it's doing to that front face. And the same thing here, Control and double click, and just clean that up. Now at this point, if we want to make adjustments to how apparent these are, what we can do with that beveled edge is we can use slide and we can pull it a little bit closer and it's going to tighten up that crease. And we'll do the same thing here. Repeat the slide, pull them a little bit closer, and it'll force that transition to be a bit tighter. Do it here. And then on the top, I might need to add additional edges to drive that as tight as I want. You can see that those are fairly close already. And what we can do is we can take this, maybe this one edge because there's a large transition there, and we can use the bevel option here. Now keep in mind the 0.05 is going to be the distance between the next adjacent edge. And take a look at that in smooth display, Control and 4. Now that edge is a bit tighter. So it's looking pretty good. And what this does now, when we take a look at it here, this gives us the shape of the fender that we can play around with and manipulate without worrying about the wheel opening, which was really causing us, essentially was just causing us problems. There are a couple of other areas that need a bevel. So like this bottom edge here, this could do with a bevel. And once again, I want to get rid of it at the front. And we can take a look in smooth display. All right, so that looks pretty good. We've got the edge fading away at the front. And if we want to fade it a little bit more, what we can do is we can get rid of the bevel sooner. And then when we take a look at this Control and 4, what we'll see is that that edge is going to sort of disappear a little bit sooner rather than to be carried over around that corner. And again, a lot of this is going to get cut out. So we do have to kind of manage that. It's going to get cut out at this edge, and it's going to essentially, it's not going to use anything here around the marker light. So we'll be cutting essentially where that edge is. So we can keep it or we can get rid of it. It really doesn't matter as long as it doesn't affect this front portion. But again, this is kind of where things are going to get cut out. So overall, I'm much happier with that straight transition. The overall fender is wider, and we can use this as the basis for building out the wheel arch, which can be done using the wheel arch that we built. Let's go ahead and bring the edges back. Using the wheel arch that we built, we can, basically what we can do is we can take both of these as form bodies and we can export them as form bodies. So you want to look for where they overlap and start to make adjustments, and that's what we're gonna take care of next. But again, overall, I think that the solution of not doing the wheel arch in here is going to give us a much cleaner version. Now, again, that's not to say that you can't do the wheel arch in there. It's just much trickier. So what I want to do now is I want to copy the no arch and maybe do a version with the arch. So the copy, again, is going to have this exact same geometry. I've got the full fender version. Let's see here. Yeah, so we've got this full fender version where, and it probably has a bit too much detail. What about this one? Where we can copy some of the geometry. So we can copy the inside. I think, well, I hate to keep making this series go on and on, but this is, unfortunately, this is just, this is how the process goes. You spend a little time, you start building a design, it works, it doesn't work, and we kind of have to decide from there what the next course of action is. And as I mentioned, I've created a bunch of different versions of these, from the original one that I posted as just a post on the YouTube channel, but there are many different versions of this that I played around with, and this is the first time I've done it without the arch. So again, we're kind of going through it at the same time to figure out how to work through the design. Before I finish up here, I just want to make sure that I'm happy with the shape. It's going to leave, if we do Control and 4 to hide our edges, it's going to leave the space between it and the fender, which means that I'll probably need to build something inside of there. That really doesn't make sense to do it as forms, but I like the shape. It matches the original shape. It's just sort of pushing it out further, and we're following those same lines here. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take this and we are going to attempt to incorporate a wheel arch back into this design now that we've driven those edges and those lines how we want them. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to work. If it doesn't work, we're going to abandon it, and then we're going to take it into surfacing, which will then be a bit easier for us to determine where things fade away and where the edges are going to blend together. The last thing I do want to leave you with on this is inspection and curvature map analysis. Using the principal max and taking a look at these red lines. These red lines are the areas where we have tight curvature. So we can see that we've got tight curvature in the areas that we would expect. Those are the driving lines where the original fender was. Now, if I take this down to, let's say 3 millimeters, this is probably the thickness that I might look at doing. I don't have any red lines. There are some right here, but again, that's going to get cut away. But I don't have any red lines on the major portions of the fender. Now, this is a good indication that I'm not going to have problems when I thicken it. If I wanted to make it, let's say 10 millimeters, These corners here are likely going to present a problem because when I thicken that, that entire face, that small face that's in there, is going to disappear, likely. And Fusion oftentimes can patch that with a sharp corner. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. But these are things that we do also want to look at, because if you do want to keep the entire fender, then you need to manipulate the geometry in a way that makes sense. But for right now, it seems like a step backwards, but it's a much better, cleaner version of the full fender that we were trying to incorporate. We just didn't have any chance working our way with the wheel arch and getting those lines to be straight, but taking a step back and doing that with a brand new, well, copy version of it without the opening gave us the opportunity to build that out. Now we can go back and we can start to insert new edges and divide this up where we see fit in order to make that wheel arch in forms. I'm going to try my best to make it work in forms. I can't guarantee it'll work. It's just kind of part of the process. But if you have any questions so far, if you stuck around for this long, you must really, really want to be able to do this. Just know that it does take time. We can knock stuff out relatively quickly, but to get a good design that has good geometry, it's not a short process. It does take a good bit of time. When we modeled the Porsche 911, that entire series was about 10 and a half hours. And that car was very smooth, very rounded, didn't have a lot of hard edges or hard lines. Anytime you're using forms and you have something that has hard edges or hard lines, those are going to be much harder to do with a change in direction, like going around a wheel arch. So those designs will become more complicated and they will require more time. Sometimes it's easy to do, sometimes it's not. It's just kind of the nature of it. But if you have any questions to this point, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.